Any specific questions? Probably not. You're like, no, it's just confusing and I want to learn more about it. Does that sound about good? Okay, awesome. So the good news is we're going to do that. The other news is we are literally on this one. We're just going to go line by line and dissect each paragraph. It's a one-page document. This will be one of the shorter classes. But what has happened recently is this form has shown up a lot. So we'll be able to cover a lot of what you guys are either have experienced or going to experience in the future. So let me jump into this and go ahead and go right to our sharing screen, share. All right, so you guys should be seeing now probably the preliminaries to the West Ashley Transmittal. Side note, we're about to have an amazing month. If you haven't heard from Tiffany today, it's because she's holed up in her office transmitting. Okay, so are you looking at the buyer sale addendum right now? Okay, I got Sarah nodding yes. All right, so here's, can you read it okay? Do I need to zoom in or anything? Okay, I will just in case, because that just means I need to zoom in. All right, so I will continue as always to check the chat, but if for instance you ask a question and I haven't answered it, feel free to unmute yourself and say, hey, I had a question. It just means because I'm sharing screen, I don't get notified of the chat right away. All right, so basically what will happen is this form will be applied to the purchase and sale agreement. Now, understand that there are two types of home sale contingencies as it relates to the purchase and sale. So if we look back at the original purchase and sale agreement, Form 310, on the first page, there's this very clear area right here on this one little bitty line that says this contract is or is not contingent on a home sale, right? So there's two things about this that are important. Number one is it's whether or not it is or is not contingent, okay? And then the second part is whether or not Form 504 is or is not attached, okay? It's not required to be attached, so you got to be clear on that. So if you're a listing agent and you receive an offer that's contingent on a home sale, you want to know if Form 504 is attached because that sets the stipulations that are on there. If someone submits an offer and the offer says that it is contingent on a home sale, but it does not include Form 504, that basically means from now until the closing date specified in this purchase and sale agreement, the buyer can get out if their home doesn't sell. It doesn't stipulate that it has to be on the market. It doesn't stipulate that they have to have a contract by a certain time, anything. It's just an open-ended home sale. Now, again, it doesn't change any of the deadlines for inspections or anything like that. Just remember the importance of, from a listing agent standpoint, you want to make sure you have Form 504 covered or checked off on here, okay? Now, also, if you're the listing agent or if you're the buyer's agent and you check off Form 504, you want to make sure it is your duty, and when I say your, I mean the agents, both. It's not my job in contracts. It's your duty to make sure that you have the home sale contingency attached and filled out if there are people, if it is checked off on this page, okay? So let's go back now to Form 504 and dive into the contingency. By the way, if you ever want quick reference to the forms, this website, screaltors.org/forms, just for reference is the quickest way to go. You do have to put in your NERDS ID, but you can look it up on here as long as you have your email and your name. And then it has the most updated ones that then synchronizes with DocuSign. All right, so Form 504. So this is the form that obviously is going to be included that says that maps out the details of the buyer's home that they're selling, okay? So the first part of this paragraph basically says is where you put what this is, that this is attached, it stipulates, I should say, this is attached to either 310, which is the typical one that you'll be using. You then put the details of the property on here, which would be the address of the property that is contingent, that is under contract, or that the buyer's offer is contingent on them selling. Okay, so this would be the buyer's home. All right, it's either going to be their primary residence, second home, vacation home. It's important to just put one of those, obviously, because I want to know about what the property is to the seller and that sort of thing. I want to, or excuse me, the buyer. So just identify that in there. Under contract attached, obviously that's a great one. If you're submitting an offer and the property is already under contract, great. You can put that in there. If you do have a contract and you don't want to attach it, you just want to give the terms, you would do that, or you would do listed by, okay? Meaning it's gone on the market. All right, so let's get real life as we're going to do in each one of these paragraphs. And I'm going to use a couple different examples. I typically go to the people I can see, so I'm going to use Sarah. So Sarah, I'm going to pretend I'm the listing agent the whole time on this one. Sarah's presenting this offer, right? And it's including this, and her buyer, she's going to have on here one of these. And if it has been listed by her, she's going to put listed by Sarah Waycaster right here. If she has not, then obviously it's not going to put that on there, which we'll talk about here in a little bit if the current property is not listed. Okay, so you'd fill all that on there. If I'm the listing agent, I'm going to look at this. The first thing I'm going to do after I review the rest of the contract before I present this to my seller is I'm going to go research that property. If it's listed by her, I'm going to go look and I'm going to get my own opinion on it. And then I'm also going to ask Sarah, hey, I noticed that the home 123 Main has been on the market. I've done some research. It looks like it's been on the market for a little longer than the rest of the homes. Tell me what's going on. Because I want to get into communication right away with the buyer's agent on this and find out what's going on with the home. We just got an offer on a property where this is happening. I'll be honest, I'm not as nervous about a home sale contingency in this market as I would be in another, because they're fairly common right now. However, the one we just got an offer on, the home has been on the market for about 87 days. And the average of the homes that have sold in there in that neighborhood is 37. So that's, again, I'm not saying that's necessarily a deal killer, but that's obviously information that I'm going to want to send to my seller. Good clarification. So there's a clarifying question of on there listed by. I said Sarah Waycaster. You could put that. You could also put Keller Williams. Technically, it would be Keller Williams. You can put the parentheses in there. It doesn't specify in here brokerage, so either one of those will work. All right, easy peasy. So second part, paragraph 2. This is where we get into the details of the contingency, and I'm going to go line by line. So the first part says, this contract is contingent upon the marketing and closing of the buyer's property no later than blank calendar days prior to closing date or on the closing date, which is buyer's sale deadline, okay? So what this is saying is that Sarah has presented me an offer. Her buyer, Mike, his home has listed for sale, and this contingency lasts until Mike's property sells either blank calendar days prior to the closing date or on the closing date that's in Sarah's original offer to me. Okay. Now the question becomes is, what do we put on here? Do we put blank calendar days prior, on the closing date? Two ways to look at it. A, depends on the current situation of the buyer, right? If Mike's home's for sale on the market and they've got a contract and it's set to close next week, and the closing of Mike's offer for my house is set to close at the end of October, I'm going to make this a stronger offer and say that this will close no later than 20 calendar days prior to the closing date. Because if Mike's house is already set to close, then let's go ahead and remove this. Let's get it out of there. Because by the way, a little bit later, it's going to give us a deadline that we have to notify the seller as to whether or not Mike's home is sold. Okay. But if we've just put the home on the market, or if the closing date's set for October 31st and your offer to purchase is set to close on October 31st, then you want to put the closing date. Right. So again, my point on this is not to get you bogged down in the details, but to get you bogged down in the details and not just fill in a blank. Right. Because what tends to happen is we treat this like inspections, and we're like, all right, I'm just going to count out 7 days for the inspection and I'm going to count out 30 days for the closing. This can be tailored specifically to the transaction and can help. Again, for example, we just recently closed on a home. There were multiple offers. This one, One of the offers was not contingent on a home sale, but not that strong. The other was contingent on a home sale, stronger offer, and the contingency here basically had this no later than 30 calendar days prior to closing date, because their home was set to close. This offer came in on a Thursday. Their home was set to close the following Tuesday. The seller said, you know what, for 4 days, I'm willing to take that risk. And if it doesn't close on Tuesday and it just gets delayed, we can move it, but it's set to close. I feel pretty good about it. And they got the better offer. Okay. All right. So the next paragraph says, should the sale of Mike's property, the buyer's property, not close by the buyer's sale deadline, buyer may terminate this contract by notice to the seller no later than blank calendar days after the buyer's deadline. Okay. So let's fast forward. The first one talks about how the buyer can act should they not meet the deadline. So let's fast forward. Mike's the buyer. And then let's say we have the home sale deadline comes up. Then Mike can give me notice no later than blank calendar days of that deadline. If I'm the buyer, I want a couple days in there. I might put 5, right? That might give me a couple days if it gets pushed and I know why. That might help. If I'm the seller, I kind of don't want them to be delayed. I might want some time to say, hey, I want to know right away that their home has not closed. Okay. The second part here says what the seller does should the property not close in the time. So now we know what Sarah and Mike can do. Now what do me and my seller do? Well, if Mike's property doesn't close by the above time, I can terminate the contract by giving notice to the buyer delivered no later than however many calendar days after the fact. Okay, so let's just say we both put 2 days on there to give a buffer. Like let's say Mike's closing gets, the attorney got the CD a day late or whatever happens. So let's say Mike's closing gets pushed 1 day. So that's great, it's covered. So I put 2 days both on there. Well, if that doesn't happen, then I have 2 days as the seller to cancel it after their deadlines, unless there's a separate stipulation in here. I can agree that a cash buyer, that they have a cash buyer that verifies the purchase price, or that Mike's buyer financing is not contingent on his home selling. So if he can still get financing and not be contingent on the selling, then we can stay under contract. Okay, I don't have to terminate. Everybody with me so far? Give me a big thumbs up. All right, cool. Big line here, have no idea why it's in caps and not bold as well. If no party terminates the sale contingency, parties follow the contract without the sale contingency. This is super important. You know it's important because I turn off screen share and we go back into the I'm here, right? Because here's what's happened. We had this, actually, let me go back. I'll show it to you via a calendar, which will be easier for you to see. So we represented the seller. Cannot see my screen. So we represented the seller, and let's just use, I'm just using this as a visual. I'm gonna make the dates up, but I want you to see the visual. I'm using this calendar over here. Okay, so we represented the seller. The buyer, our contract on our house was set to close October 30th. The buyer had a buyer's agency, had a buyer's home sale contingency that was set to close on the 28th. However, the contingency was written with that number in here being 7 calendar days prior to the closing. No one thought about that. They just filled out they threw a number in there. They said 7 calendar days. They thought that's plenty of time, so we don't have to do it, it doesn't matter that it's closing after that. Okay, so fast forward, 7 calendar days is here before closing, because it's calendar days, not actual days. Buyer's closing is set to be today, or the home on the buyer's house is set to be closing today. The buyer on their home, true story, the buyer on their home 100% flakes out. Signs all the documents. It was supposed to be a cash deal. leaves the closing table, goes back home, and never wires the money. The money never wires. This true story happened 3 weeks ago. Okay. So obviously, our client, who's the seller, feels, well, they didn't perform on the contract. The problem is our client's Form 504 said that we had to give them notice to the home they were buying by this date here. Well, all this happened after the deadline to tell them. And we gave them no notice that it hadn't closed because it hadn't closed. So fast forward now, we go back to the purchaser of the home that we want to purchase and say, hey, the buyer on our home completely flaked out the last minute. Purchaser said, I'm so incredibly sorry. That is absolutely terrible. And I'm keeping your earnest money. Because as the contract is written, it says right here, because you did not give us notice that the property will not close by this deadline here, which was 7 days, no later than, I think this said 2 calendar days after the deadline, both of those had passed. So now we've got a seller who can't sell, who obviously doesn't have a buyer in their house, and they were at risk of losing their earnest money. Luckily, it did work out, but it's important to know that's why it's so important to see these, to see all of these as one. All right, make sense? See how everybody's doing on here. All right, I only got like 5 of you with your cameras on, so you're representing everyone else, and you all look fantastic. So the rest of the crowd should feel good that you're their representative. All right, let's go back.
Hey, Joseph.
Yes.
I'm scanning both screens. I'm looking at a contingency that I have right now, and I missed I listened to what you were saying, but I missed where the day would go in there for buyer must give, 2 calendar days notice. Just
right.
Real quick, where's the spot on the?
It is on the second part of paragraph 2, right?
Okay.
So this is where the buyer will give their notice on when to let them know that their home hasn't closed.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep. Is the option for termination available for either party? So good question. Is the option for termination available for either party? The option for termination is not available for any of the parties unless the buyer's house doesn't sell. But if the buyer's house doesn't sell, the seller can, yes, terminate per paragraph, the second paragraph here. So it is available for both of them. Unless, as it says in here, the parties agree on these, either a cash buyer, they verify that the buyer no longer, they can close without it, which basically removes the contingency, or the buyer's financing is not contingent on the sale of the buyer's property, which 9 times out of 10 it is. Okay. All right. So now it goes into, let's go back to the scenario. Sarah presents Mike's offer. Here are the buyer's duties between the contract's effective date and the buyer's sale deadline. Okay. So these are the duties that happen from when we agree on this until this deadline up here. The first one is make only good faith efforts and actions to sell their buyer's property. Okay, so they obviously are going to do that. Timely inform the seller and brokers of pertinent information regarding the sale of the buyer's property. Okay, so this gets into the details of what should I share with them and what should I not. If you're questioning whether or not you should share something with if Sarah and Mike are marketing their property and they get a contract on there, if Sarah's question is, should I say something or should I explain this information to the listing agent, Joseph? 9 times out of 10, the answer is yes. Because again, unless it's fallen through, the seller can't just say, hey, I'm out, right? So she shouldn't be concerned about sharing proper information with me. So let's say something comes up in Mike's contract and the buyer on his home's financing changes or it's getting a little squirrely. I think a professional courtesy would be Sarah would call me and say, hey, I want to give you a quick update on this. Right now, we're not showing any signs of a problem. However, they've had to switch lenders. They've had to do this or this has come up. I just want to keep you fully informed. Awesome, Sarah. Thank you so much. Keep me posted, right? Use this as an opportunity to communicate. All right. To direct brokers or law firms to disclose pertinent information regarding the sale of the buyer's property. That's really the kind of the same thing, but to the different parties. Within blank calendar days of contract, deliver to seller and brokers a copy of each contract for the sales buyer's property. So this is saying that when he does get a contract of the house, that they will deliver a copy of that contract. Now, you can blank out the pertinent information, right? You can blank out the closing, the price. You can blank out the buyer and seller's name if you want to. The seller's name they'll know, but the buyer's name you can blank out. I wouldn't blank out the closing date. I wouldn't blank out the terms. They want to see the terms of the contract. There's nothing really on the contract other than name and price of the buyer that are truly confidential. And then last part, within blank calendar day. Oh, by the way, on this one, this there's no reason that this should be more than 1 or 2 calendar days. Let's go ahead and keep communicating with the seller side. If I'm Sarah, I want to keep communicating with the seller side that things are going. Here's what it looks like. We got a contract. That's great. Then within blank calendar days of closing, deliver the seller and broker's notice of the buyer's property sale has closed. If buyer defaults, breaches these duties, seller may seek remedies. Terminate, example, terminate litigation. Basically kind of goes into the same default as the main contract. All right, so let's chat for a second. I got a couple questions here. Let me see what we got in here. 3B should be email correct. So great clarification. So it said deliver notice. So 3B said timely inform or deliver notice. Yeah, that can all be email based on the notice that was based on the specification of what the notice is on the main contract. So in the purchase and sale agreement, there's one of the last paragraphs says notice, and it'll say all notices to be delivered to the agent at the email listed on page 9 of the contract. So yeah, that's where you give the notice. Great clarification. And I'm serious when I say that. Like the devil is in the details right now, y'all. Because again, I'm not a doomsday person. I'm actually having a lot of fun right now, but I am dealing with more conflict in contracts right now because of emotions and people freaking out, and they're then finally coming back to the details, and it's really causing some situations. So just every little bit of this detail, including how I'm delivering in notice. By the way, as a side note, the more comfortable you're explaining this to your client, the more comfortable your client is when the conflict comes, because they already have confidence in you. So, we have a couple situations right now, unfortunately, where we're going through, and it works in our client's favor, and that's fine, but we're really having to explain this almost like the first time to our clients, and we're already under contract. And I get it. Everyone's in a hurry. You're in a multiple offer situation. Everything's like, blah, we're all freaking out and we're busy. Get on a Zoom with your client and go through these documents. If you're going to be submitting an offer for one of their largest financial investments or one of their largest financial sales of their life, you have no reason not to just get on the boring call and go through the contract for your client's comfort, right? And make sure they understand. Okay, so we've wrapped up basically everything that happens as far as the contingency is concerned and everyone's duties in the contingency, mainly on the buyer side. Now let's go and see what it looks like on the seller side. All right. So paragraph 4, marketing and subsequent offers. Seller may continue to market the property and may accept any offer as backup contract using Form 391. I'll come back to that. MLS rules may require categorization of sellers to be listed other than active. All right. Let me just be very clear. So we just dealt with this. Even if you have an addendum that says the seller will remain active in the MLS, they cannot remain active in the MLS if you have a ratified contract on their property. Yes, there is an argument that they should have a separate field that's active home sale contingency or active something. They don't. It's the rules. Follow them. Right? That just is what it is. Okay, so it still will be marketed, and it does say active contingent, and then the reason is home sale. It's not ideal from a seller standpoint. I get it, but there's no way around it. It is what the rules are. All right. So you've been marketing it. Let's say you get another offer. So upon seller delivering notice to buyer of a subsequent offer from a cash buyer or a subsequent offer that does not contain a home sale contingency. Okay, so if they get if they're, hold on, I just drew a blank a second here. Okay, yes. So if I get another offer on my property that does not contain a home sale contingency, then Mike, through Sarah, within blank calendar days can choose to comply with one of the following. I don't know that I'd make this super long, within 5 days, possibly 2 or 3, but you want to give Mike enough time to do his research. So within those however many days, Mike has 2 options. Number 1, deliver documentation to the seller that the buyer's property is under contract, scheduled to close by the buyer's sale deadline with no contingencies other than financing and repairs. Okay? Or remove this contingency only if Mike's property is not required for him to obtain the purchase money. Okay? If the buyer does timely and properly comply with either one of these, then the buyer remains in the primary position ahead of the subsequent potential buyers, and seller may only accept the subsequent offer as a backup contract using form whatever, 391. If buyer does not comply with these, then either party may, doesn't mean they have to, terminate the contract by notice. Okay, so let's chat through this. Mike can do one of 2 things. Mike comes to me, or I go to Mike and I say, hey, appreciate we got this offer. However, we got another offer on the house. The only contingencies on the house it's either a cash offer or it's a typical offer with repairs and financing, which is basically every other offer, unless they have a home sale contingency. They technically cannot, it is a moot point if the second offer I got has a home sale contingency, but it's just a higher price. It only can be a cash offer or an offer that has financing and repair contingencies in there, okay? So if I go back to Sarah and say, hey, here's where we are, as long as Mike can provide me proof that he has a contract on his house that only has repair and financing contingencies left on it, nothing weird, as long as he can prove to me that he has that on his house and that contract's set to close by the deadline on Form 504, or if he doesn't have that, Mike can say, well, I can still purchase the house without selling mine, then he stays in the first position. Second one's obvious. It's the first one that throws people a little bit. Okay, because here's the deal. Let's go back to earlier. Let's say when they submitted the offer, the home went under contract right away, or the home was already under contract. Well, technically, if it were already under contract and he let me know that, he's already performed on 4A, because all he has to do is provide information that it's under contract, scheduled to close by the deadline, with no contingencies other than financing and repairs. They don't have to be through the repair procedure. They don't have to be through the CO100. They just can't have any contingencies in addition to that to not stay in the first position. So this is it protects your buyer very well. It protects Mike and Sarah in this one very, very well. Now, again, if he doesn't timely comply, then the seller may only, or if he does timely comply, then they stay as a backup. If the buyer does not comply, then either party at this point can terminate the contract by notice. All right, so Regina's question is, what if the original contract falls through? Great question. All right, so let's talk about that. So let's say, we'll just use the even days. You know, we've got a closing at the end of October. We have a closing of October 31st, October 30th. That's a Friday. And let's say we have a contract and the last minute, or let's say it just falls through at any given point, as long as the date specified, should just stay on this. I feel like y'all want to see me or something. As long as you're still within this deadline up here, the buyer, or I as a seller can't do anything. So Mike comes in and we're going under contract today, and then in 2 weeks his home sale falls through. Well, technically at that point in time, there's no reason that I as the seller can't cancel it, because he still has the opportunity based on this contract to get another contract that will close within the time frame of X closing date. Now, there's an area in this that's not super clear, because let's be honest, there's going to be a date of no return. Come October 15th, really, or even the week before, the chances of Mike now getting a contract on his house that's going to close in 2 to 3 weeks and meet these deadlines is slim to none. So the seller at that point can do one of two things. They can agree to extend the closing, or they can well, really, that's the big thing. They can do that. They can release, obviously, or they can just give him a little bit more time to see if someone comes in, because that's the default one. All right, so Regina says, let's see. What if another contract falls through? If another offer comes in during the time that the first contract is terminated? Oh, great question. Okay, that's a good one. This is why I'm glad we're having these discussions, because you can see how, by the way, I can show you like all my scrap papers over the last couple of days where I literally have house drawn in the middle, house over here, and then I have like buyer and seller drawn here, and buyer here, seller here. I mean, this can get confusing. So ask the questions and please call me if you have them. All right, so in Regina's situation, if I understand correctly, she's saying, in this situation, Mike's contract fell through, okay? And then what happens if an offer comes in during the time that Mike's contract fell through? So if I then get an offer on the house and Mike doesn't currently have a contract, then that will go to paragraph 4 in here, where at that point in time, Mike is either going to have to deliver documentation that he's under contract, which he doesn't have, or he can remove the contingency to move forward. So that, unfortunately, at that point, if he no longer has a contract on his house and I get another offer on the house, then he can be kicked out at this point. So good clarification. Did that answer your question, Regina?
It's easier to get off mute. So the question is that if the contract falls through, is it Sarah's obligation to let you know, hey, the first contract fell through? Because otherwise we could just be riding along with the original contract that isn't even valid anymore. Great
question. So that's covered in paragraph 4, part 2. So if you look back at this part B, timely inform seller and brokers of pertinent information regarding the sale of the buyer's property.
Okay, perfect.
So that would fall in there as the pertinent information. Yes. Good question. I love them. Anything else? Good news is it's a short one. There's a lot of details to know in it. Oh, one thing that I was going to say when I came to this, let me go back on it. Well, let me see. Are there any other questions on Form 504? Because the topic of this, and we can talk about a couple of things too. But I wanted to. Okay. So in this, there's a reference to Form 391. It talks about it at a couple different places. It talks about when it comes in. Right here, Form 391, and it's referring to it as a backup offer. Well, it's not entirely what Form 391 is. Let me show you Form 391 and tell you, in my opinion, the best way to use it. Form 391 is basically clauses and addendums, or clauses for addendums and amendments to. And basically, it's a checklist document. So it's 3 pages long, and it has a bunch of additional clauses and amendments to. It's originally designed to reference the initial offer in this whole area here, and then check the box of whatever this may be. I personally don't love that, because then I think you just have a bunch of paperwork you have to sift through. So if you're going to use this for a backup clause, simply come to this and copy and paste this verbiage of this backup clause and put it in an addendum with your backup offer. Or make sure that you have it in the addendum should you be receiving a backup offer. Okay, so Form 391 actually has a lot of really good verbiage in there, which, by the way, that goes to the second part of this that I'll get to here in a second, so I keep you in under an hour. But these, like, if you're going to write an addendum, it's fine if you're going to copy and paste from here to that one because these are approved addendums, right? These are approved by the South Carolina Association of Realtors. They've been reviewed by attorneys. Everything's great. That being said, there are a lot of people right now. And if you think I'm talking to you, I am. And there's no judgment, but we got to stop. There are a lot of people practicing law right now, okay? And by practicing law, I mean you're writing stuff into contracts other than filling in the blank. Even if it's writing an addendum, that is, some of the things that we just said, you're limited on what you can do. And we have a lot of times, when you look at a contingency, you've got to look at what the contingency is, who's responsible for the contingency, when it's responsible by, what happens if it doesn't go through. And that's the one that's killing me. Again, I'm not giving you these tips to write contingencies. Don't misunderstand me. However, what's happening is people are writing contingencies that say what they want to do, what they want to have done, who they want to have do it, and when, and that's it. And if you notice that any part of the contract, from earnest money, proof of funding, inspections, CO100s, surveys, appraisals, they all say what it is, who's going to do it, when they're going to do it by, and what happens if it's not done. And if you don't have what happens when it's not done, you're at an impasse. So that's why it's so important that you shouldn't be writing this on your own. You should actually be either having an attorney or using verbiage that's already included in some of the other forms. Great question. So the question came in and said, when we write an addendum and copied from 391, do we have to annotate on that addendum where the verbiage came from? No. I mean, you can put from form 391 and then that, because you're copying and pasting it, because here's what we're all doing. First and foremost, we're protecting our client. Second, we're building our case if it goes to court, right? So we protected our client, everything's great, it goes to court. Well, Camille, I see you put this form in there, South Carolina law states that you can't practice law. So from where did you get this dialogue? I copied and pasted it from a pre-approved form. So that's why you want to do that. So just be careful on that. The other area that we're practicing law is we're advising our clients what their exposure is to default. Okay, there's two reasons this is bad. Number one, it is 100% against the law to talk to your clients on how they can terminate an agreement that they have. You're basically consulting them on how to terminate an agreed upon legal document. That within itself is against the law. Secondly, when you start to give advice about exposure, you are practicing law at that point in time. Again, I'm not telling you this is scary. I'm just telling you this is what people are doing. Here's what you can tell them about what happens of default. Paragraph 23 on pages 6 and 7 of the contract. Mr. Seller, if you default on this, the buyer can deliver notice. They can pursue any remedies available to them at law and recover attorney's fees and all other direct costs of litigation if you're found to be in default of this. Well, Camille, what does that mean? Honestly, at this point, if you're thinking about moving forward and we're in default, then you will need to speak to an attorney at this time about what further exposure you can have. By the way, 9 times out of 10, when this is happening, they're already in relationship with the closing attorney or the attorney they're using. They can ask them. But what you don't want to be doing is they can sue you to sell the house. They can sue you to do this. No, for 2 reasons. 1, it's legal advice. And 2, the last thing you want to do is come across as giving any sort of pressure or any of them to stay within the contract. Because where you can't coach them on defaulting on a contract they've signed, you also don't want to be the person that's talking them into staying in a contract that they truly don't feel they should be in. Mr. Buyer comes to you and says, well, that's fine. I think this repair procedure paragraph, even though I signed it, initialed it, and you explained it to me and you're blue in the face, is the stupidest thing on the planet. I don't want to move forward because the air conditioner is 57 years old and leaks Freon. That's great. If you default, though, the seller's going to deliver notice to terminate the contract. They'll possibly pursue remedies available to them, and they could recover attorney's fees. So you just need to know that that's your risk. Well, what else could they do? At this time, you need to talk to the attorney about that. Here's where I find that most people avoid doing that, is you feel that I think, well, two, you don't like being contentious. You don't deal with it at all, which is, I can relate. I don't love it either. Or two, you feel like you have to be the answer of it all. And quite honestly, that's what most of us do, us, right? I'm a card carrying member, right? And you've got to understand that there's a specific paragraph in this form that states, there's actually two of them. One here, that you have not induced them. One here talks about that you're not an attorney, an HVAC person, or anything like that. And then down here, they will consult a law firm, right? So understand the contract already says the things that you don't want to say. So go ahead and use that as a script. I am here to walk you through the process of marketing and selling your home, walk you through getting into the contract, facilitating the transaction, making sure that all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted, and helping you on that. However, when it comes to this is legal advice, and we need to get an attorney to help about it. Now, I'll just go ahead and say, in the event you're in a fishy situation, and let's say you've got, the buyer and seller are both represented by Butler, and Butler says, hey, at this point, I can't give advice because I represent both, which is not abnormal. We do have the opportunity to a small level to get some questions answered through an attorney. But this is also part of the charge that the buyer or seller may have to incur. Okay. All right. Questions? I guess that means everybody's a Form 504 expert. Manny, you're muted.
Hello? Hey.
There you go.
It's kind of on topic. What other things is it, or do you suggest we don't do, even though we could accidentally be doing it, like advising our client how to leave a contract?
Yeah, it's one of those, obviously come to me if the question is there. Either shoot me an email or call me. I'd be glad to answer that. But yeah, if someone comes to you and says, hey, I want out, or I want, any of this, say, listen, at this point, it's my understanding of what the contract is. And there's nothing wrong with saying that. If you're talking to me or I'm talking to you as the agency, I understand that at this point you want to remove yourself from the contract. As I read the contract, we're still in repair procedure, or we're still blank that or the other. So we have to do this. We would have to go through the procedure. If you absolutely are saying you do not want to do that, then yes, we would need to get an attorney involved. Where you want to be careful is along those lines. So here's a very specific example. So let's say you come to me and say, hey, look, we've gone through this. We got the inspection. I know we're repair procedure and I know everything's working in there, but I want out. What you don't want to do is say, hey, well, why don't we just go ask for everything and then hope they say no, right? Like at that point, you're like, because if you go ask for everything and they say yes, now you're going to, and then they come back and say, well, you know what, even if you're going to do everything, or let's go ask for more and hope they say no. I've heard this too. We'll just ask for more, and if they say no, we'll just say we feel that that's a part of the repair procedures. So stuff like that. And it's not as blatant in the moment. That's the challenge of giving examples, is that I don't feel like I don't see Manny, with this buyer like, wow, here we go. We're going to basically go and make a bunch of stuff up. What it is everyone's emotional, and you're saying, you know what, I understand that. So let's ask for all of it. And then if they don't agree to do all of it, then we can argue at that point. That's typically how that plays out. But then when everyone looks at it without emotion, they're like, so basically you just threw a bunch of crap at the wall and hoped it stuck, or didn't stick in this matter. And it did. So you're gonna be careful.
Gotcha.
Good question.
Thanks.
Yep. Anybody else?
I have a emotional question.
Okay. All right.
I have a very emotional seller.
Yeah. Okay. So you have a seller.
Yeah. Not in the sense of crying and getting sad, just feels like his place is the greatest. We come up with a price. I did a net sheet for him to kind of give him an idea.
Mm-hmm.
On that net sheet, I expected, just from talking to a couple peers, that the closing costs would be around $5,000.
Okay.
They turned out to be 8. It's not a big difference, but they asked the seller covers it. When they made their offer, they asked the seller covers closing cost. Seller is just kind of in one of those spots. He refied a couple of months ago and just feels like he should make more than he's going to. So I gave him some scenarios. This is what you would net if we sold it at whatever, 268, if we sold it at 273, all the way up. Listed at 273, got an offer for 275, asking for 3 pound more in closing cost I had on the original one. And so he couldn't cover it. The people buying it can't front that money. They need it. And so I said, if it comes down to it, you don't want to budge, we can say we turn around with an offer of 278 and maybe it'll appraise for that. And then it's in there. Back and forth we go. Long story short, that was just worst case. We'd try that. I don't think it appraised for it. And he hits me back with, we have to do 278 from now on. That's all we can do. I'm kind of rambling right now. My mind is shot with this guy, but the reason for it, I'm sorry. The reason I'm bringing this up is that I said to him, hey, let's look at these scenarios. Let's go ahead and depend on what the offers are or moving forward, what gets offered. Let's go ahead and have some responses ready and loaded so that we're not doing it from passion or excitement or just got numbers real quick.
That's a good idea.
It didn't really help him, but I don't know.
Yeah, so
one event.
Yeah, so a couple different things. One is setting the expectation. And again, I'm not. My answer is not implying that you didn't do any of this. I'm just going through a list of things to be done. First things first is setting the expectations. Anytime you do a net sheet, you've got to be overly disclaiming that this is an estimate. Also, it's probably a good idea, but typically for me, whenever I do a net sheet, I don't include buyer closing costs in there. I don't try to estimate anything or anything like that. But I have a giant bold starred buyer closing costs not included. And when we're listing the property and we go through the comps, we know what the chances are of them getting an offer with closing costs based on what is closed in there. So that's the big one. That's neither here nor there. Whether or not you did that doesn't matter now. If you didn't, do it next time. If you did, good job. Now let's fast forward. You get an offer and everyone that's coming in is asking for closing costs, either more than he expected or he didn't pay attention and it just can't fit in there. So there's two challenges at this point. Number one, his financial situation does not determine the price of the house, right? I mean, it can't. And he's trying to make that happen now, which is difficult. The other thing is if he truly wants to sell his house, it just may have to be that he holds strong and say, listen, if 275 is your max or your lease that you can take without paying closing costs, then we just have to stick to that. Now you have to make the decision then as a professional as to whether or not the house is going to sell for that. Be careful on, the whole non-appraisal thing is interesting right now. And because you have to be careful on saying, well, let's just do it. But, if it doesn't appraise, we can go from there. Well, that's, I'm not saying that's what you said. But sometimes we say that. You're at risk of putting your client, you're at risk of now giving your client not really sage advice because now they have their house off the market. Appraisal is not normally done until 3 or 4 weeks into the process. And then if it's truly a risk, you don't know. Now, and let's say if it's an FHA buyer or a VA buyer, you want to make sure, hey, by the way, if you do this and the appraisal doesn't come in, that appraisal sticks with the property. So if this falls through, anybody who comes in from here forward, that's it. That's the appraised value if they're doing FHA or VA. Conventional does not apply, but the chances of the appraisal being much different. So I don't know that I'm totally answering your question. As far as the seller being emotional, you just got to go back to facts and scenarios to say, listen, here's where they are. And quite honestly, if Mike says, 278, we can't go from here. If that's completely out of the question, you might want to consider whether or not you want the listing. Or if you're just new on the market, you might want to say, because stranger things are happening right now. right? And again, there's some of the real estate purists would, give me 10 lashings for saying this. If the seller's motivated, I'm all right pressing the price a little bit if they are going to have some sort of conversation to adjust it if the market tells us it's too high. I know from all the people who just firmly price the exact price they feel it should be every time and don't ever take a high price listing. That's great. And I don't think that's always reality, especially in your case when you're talking about a difference of, now the problem is, you said 275, is that the actual number?
273 was the listed price. The offer was at 275, and that was 3,000 over what I had him expecting. But the response, really, there were a couple of responses that him and I had to kind of chew through for him to see if he wanted to sell it. Well, you just had to look at numbers.
Yeah.
But so we're at 278 is what I sent over to him. That's what he wanted to do for him to go ahead and sign. And then we send over to the buyer from there. But I didn't expect him to come back thinking that that's the new way we're going to try and list it.
Yeah, and that is the risk in that. It's like, hey, if they're willing to do it, maybe we should be asking more. Specifically to this situation, I'd caution him of the risk of going anything above 275 because that's a strong cap on a buyer's search. So if he goes to 276, 7 or 8, anybody who stopped their search at 275 doesn't see his house anymore.
Right.
Not a huge group of people because typically in that price point it's 250 to 3. But 275 is a strong number. I mean, I'd actually argue that's a pretty strong, hard price point. It's not like you can't really do that with 270. People don't, search 250 to 270. They normally do 250 to 275, 275 to 300. So,
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. If you have any questions or need anything, let me know. Otherwise, go write some contracts and get in trouble so you have to call me.
Thank you,
Or
Joseph.
call me first so you don't have to get in trouble. This is recorded. Call me first so you don't have to get in trouble.
Hey, I'll email you. Never mind.
Okay.
Thank
Sounds
you.
good, bud. Yep.
Thank you.
Bye.